Okay, this is it. Crap. Okay. This isn't looking good. I can't carry any more of that. Holy hell. Okay, this is it. Damn it! Oh, it's over. Uh-oh. This ain't good. All right, let's do this.
Hey there hunters, and welcome back to the Gunners Guild. Today we're going to take another small break from Baldur's Gate and talk about more Remnant II. After about 400 plus official hours on Steam of playing, we're going to be discussing and ranking each of the handguns here in Remnant II, based on their performance in Apocalypse and some personal preference. I also collected some insights from fellow players on the Discords to help out with the rankings, so it's not just entirely biased towards my opinions. So obviously the tier list is going to be one of two, as we're not going to compare the handguns with the long guns because it's not really fair, and melee is just World's Edge, Stonebreaker, and Feral Judgment. But anyway, let's get into this and hopefully make this quick for each of the guns because we kind of have a lot to talk about. Starting in alphabetical order, we're going to discuss the Bolt Driver. It is a fusion rifle for the handgun slot, and what that means is that it's held to charge, then released, then burst. You can improve it with such things that reduce charge time, such as the Supercharged Mutator and the Archer's Crest Ring. The Bolt Driver can actually dish out some monstrous DPS, rivaling and exceeding most handgun slots and even quite a few long gun options. Now, one of the downsides to the Bolt Driver is that if you're going to be using it, you want Archer's Crest. And if you're using Archer's Crest, which means you probably want to use a bow in your primary slot, though the bow is going to want to take the supercharger mutator since you can't use two of the same, so it's honestly kind of hard to fit in a build at like maximum performance, but it's not impossible. The Bolt Driver here also has a free mod slot and solid range, and the only significant drawback here is that it has a pretty bad reload speed by default, and without investment on like the charge time, it's pretty bad. It's still a very powerful gun in the right hands though. So the first one that's going to be on our ranking, with the majority of the votes, we're going to drop the Bolt Driver here into A tier. Seriously, if you haven't used it much, give it a try. I know it's not meant for every build, but it's still a very solid handgun. Next up on the list is the Cube Gun, an interesting handgun. The Cube Gun provides you with infinite ammo, which can be a godsend on Apocalypse, but can be tricky to use because it's projectile based, not hit scan, and if you miss a cube, it can kind of break your infinite ammo cycle to force you to reload, which is kind of excruciatingly long. The other downside to infinite ammo though is that it has heat buildup, so you also have to be careful with how many cubes you throw, but thankfully the microcompressor ring remedies this a lot. And there are a few other long guns you can pair with the microcompressor to kind of work on both weapons. The mod attached to the Cube Gun is the Cube Shield, which also absorbs range damage only, not melee, and strengthens the cube. And when the cube is fired, it will slowly move and deal damage to anything in its path. The mod is kind of okay. It's kind of tricky to use because it breaks if you take too much damage, and it doesn't block anything at melee range, so you really have to pay attention to how much it absorbs and kind of where you're using it, and then also you have to shoot it at the optimal time. It's cool, but the damage is pretty low, making it just not great for clearing anything, but basically trash mobs, which is fine. I mean, overall, it's just an okay weapon, so we're going to drop the Cube Gun here into C tier. It suffers from being non-hit scan and having differing scales between the gun and the mod, making one always suffer for the other, so unfortunately we can't place it higher. And then we have the Double Barrel, the big bag shotgun here in the handgun slot. The Double Barrel is a very meaty gun, packing some of the biggest hits in the game and fully capable of being your primary weapon. The main downsides to this gun are a clip size of 2 and the range, but honestly you can remedy both of these without too much investment. The Extender Mutator brings us to a clip 3, which is more than enough, and the Hunter Trait Long Shot provides us with 6 more meters, bringing up to the range up to 11 meters, on par with most other shotguns. But of course we can further extend this by using the Targeting Jewel. And then scaling range and some spread reduction makes this gun an absolute beast. So across the board, the votes were split between A and S tier, but since I have final say, I'm going to have to give this little guy an S tier. It's easily one of the best handguns, and you can fit it in most builds. Continuing in alphabetical order, we have the Enigma, and while this gun has seen 2 nerfs in the last 3 patches, it still delivers the shock and awe. What makes Enigma so strong is not that it can just target 5 enemies at a time, which already is absurd. It does make quick work of all trash in the game, but also because it scales very well with a variety of different scaling options. Looking back at the Cube Gun, if you're a range damage build, the Cube Gun's shot's going to be okay, but the mod's going to be horribly weak, and the reverse is true if you're a mod power build. But with Enigma, you can scale range damage and the primary shot will be excellently strong, and if you scale the mod damage, the ticks from the mod get very strong as well, and they can take down elites in no time. But because the mod triggers off you shooting, either way you scale it, you're going to be dishing out some pretty good damage. Also, both the shot and the mod can scale off of electrical and elemental damage. So yeah, it's just very flexible. It has AoE, it's great at trash clear, and the mod is synergistic. We've had a little bit of discord on this one, again being split between half A and half S tier across the board. And I'm going to say I'm pretty torn, as it's not as good as it used to be, but it's still probably the best trash clearing gun in the game. So I want to give it an S, also because it's just the best way to deal with Annihilation's orbs. Now following up the Enigma is the other elemental thrower, Hellfire. I have to put it out there, I am not a fan of this gun. The range is pitiful and it doesn't scale with range increasing items or traits, and the damage is bad for it being such close range, and also doesn't have good weak spot or crit modifiers, and really the only actual good damage on it is the burn dot. And if you're on Apocalypse, it just kind of takes way too long to flamethrower down enemies at close range unless you're in Geisha. But on lower difficulty, it just kind of melts everything, so I mean I see why normal people like it, but we only really care about its Apocalypse performance. The mod is also kind of weird to me because like Cube Gun, you also can't scale both the mod and the gun effectively. The gun wants fire damage and burning damage, while the mod wants explosive damage and crit, so it's just kind of fighting you either way. Now I want to give this a C tier. It's kind of I'm not a fan, but everyone else seemed to think it a little bit better than me, so I have to put it in B tier based on popular votes, but I gotta say, definitely not for me. Then we have the MP60R, the submachine gun, and I feel like the SMG is very underrated, and I rarely see people use or talk about it, and I honestly can't see why that's the case. The damage is very, very solid for a handgun, its clip size is great, the range is solid, it has 10% base crit chance by default, and the reload isn't bad. Like, it's just good across the board. It's excellent for fishing for crits, and I always pair it with Twisted Wounds to grab bleeds as well. Seriously, top quality handgun right there. Everyone seems to agree that it's a solid A tier weapon. The only thing that's kind of holding back the SMG is the actual time to kill on some enemies, which can be higher with single shot weapons, as like such a case for all the automatics pretty much. But regardless, the SMG can clear pretty much all the zones and all the elites in the game, and it's even not bad for bossing if you want to swap between two automatic weapons with like Provisioner's Ring or something. It's really, really good. Up next is the Mountaintop, the Meridian. The handheld grenade launcher is quite a fan favorite. It fires little grenades that bounce off surfaces and explode on contact, or can be shot to explode early. And while it's fun and unique, because who doesn't like explosives, right? I don't think Meridian performs up to snuff in higher difficulties. It does have some pretty significant drawbacks that bring it down, including it being a projectile weapon with a weird arc and a real definite skill curve to be able to use it properly. Having to lead the targets and bank off walls and stuff, like the grenades can be very finicky. It also almost requires you to run kinship trait, because otherwise you could literally just kill yourself with a single shot or misplaced grenade, or an enemy who decides to charge you. The damage also has fall off at range, which is a bit odd for a grenade, so like you can't use it to lob grenades far off into the distance without, dealing minimal damage. Honestly, the best part about Meridian is the mod, which are screamers, and with 5 charges, you get plenty of missiles to dish out to enemies and elites. And the fact that it scales off of explosive damage for both the primary shot and the mod makes the Meridian synergize with itself well enough. Overall, we're kind of split, but it ended up giving it a solid B tier for the Meridian. And now we have the last thrower handgun, Nebula. Like Hellfire, I am not a fan of this gun, but it does have plenty of good things going for it that Hellfire does not. Starting with the negatives though, like Hellfire, it has very poor range, lack of weak spot and crit scaling, and overall pretty low damage output, even lower than Hellfire. It makes this thing absolutely F tier in terms of damage. But silver linings do exist. Nebula is one of the very few ways you can actually get the corrosive dot on enemies in this game, which does provide you with 10% increased damage to enemies who are corroded. This is not a 10% multiplicative modifier, it is just a flat added damage modifier. Not as good, but hey, free damage is free damage, right? The other great feature about Nebula is the mod Nanoswarm. Now, the Swarm of Remnant 1 returns, but it's not completely broken like it was. The damage of Nanite Swarm isn't anything to write home about, and while it does do acid damage, it does not apply corrosion. But again, we still have silver linings. There are plenty of good aspects to Nanite Swarm. First is that it's a fire and forget mod, which will damage stuff for 15 seconds without you needing to swap it or upkeep it or anything. So you can sustain better DPS on your long gun and just get free damage with an active Nanite Swarm. The Swarm can also crit, which can proc crit things such as Sapphire Dreamstone or Devoured Loop, and that can also hit weak spot, which can help proc things like